thank you, Dr. Sen, for a wonderful presentation. And next, ladies and gentlemen, we will be looking at the 2014 elections and its policy implications. May I invite Dr. Subir Vittal, Director Research at Brookings India, to share his perspectives on the economic policy priorities for the new government.
Distinguished members of the ISAS board and faculty, distinguished participants, my fellow speakers, we begin by thanking ISAS and the university for inviting me to share my thoughts. I have on this panel my former colleague Dr. Subra, so with your acquiescence, I will let him talk about the macroeconomic issues and I'll focus on more structural issues that I've been thinking about. Is the audio okay? Yeah, okay, thank you. So I'm going to basically start off by saying that I think we have to draw a very significant comparison between where the economy was in 1991 and where it is today. There are many parameters on which you can disagree with this comparison, but the critical one to me is that a decisive break, a decisive change in policy was necessary then to keep the economy from falling over the cliff, so to speak. And I think to a large extent that is the situation today. That over the last few years, some very, very difficult structural problems have emerged, and these have actually contributed to the way the economy has performed. And unless these are resolved, the ability of the economy to recover its very impressive growth trajectory of a few years ago is questionable. So I'm going to focus on three basic structural issues. They're all familiar, they're all things that we will talk about all the time. But I just want to place them in some sort of perspective and use that to talk about possible solutions, but also difficulties. I was asked to refer to the political economy issues that these solutions might raise. The first one is food and the persistence, the entrenchment of food inflation. This has been running at close to and mostly over 10% per year for over 7 years now. And that is really a completely untenable proposition in the sense that whatever else happens on the macro front, growth slows down, commodity prices ease off, but overall inflation remains very high. And that is a constraint that the central bank has had to operate under for all this time. If you accept the paradigm that the central bank has to respond to high inflation no matter what causes it, then the fact that inflation has been so high basically means that the central bank cannot provide any stimulus for growth. You might reject the paradigm, that leads you to a different set of policy implications, but that is the paradigm on which they have been operating. Now, why has food inflation been so high? A number of reasons, some fairly significant structural ones. The way I like to put it is to look at it as, in a sense, an unintended consequence of our success in dealing with similar food problems 40 years ago. We managed to deal with our persistent scarcity of cereals, of rice and wheat in particular, by putting in place an incentive framework that provided enormous incentives both through procurement, through pricing, and through subsidies on inputs for farmers to grow rice and wheat. Now these crops have become the mainstays of Indian agriculture. Over a period of time, particularly the last 10 or 15 years, that Indian consumers have, as a result of increasing affluence, started to diversify their diets. And as a result of this, there is a significant disconnect between between what consumers want and what farmers have incentives to grow. The government effectively has become the buyer or the consumer, the last resort. As a farmer, you basically are dealing with the government. If you grow rice or wheat, you have a guaranteed price, a guaranteed buyback, and you don't really have to pay much attention to what's happening in other markets because there are risks and other uncertainties that go with that. This has resulted, on one hand, in a significant supply-demand imbalance in crops other than rice and wheat, and on the other hand, a significant build-up of stocks of rice and wheat, which actually cost the government significantly in terms of the fiscal commitments because there is a subsidy element. So how do we break out of this? I think is the critical challenge to the next government. Basically, it means completely reorienting the incentive framework, and that's not very easy to do because other than rice and wheat, there aren't too many crops that can be stored in the same basically minimalist conditions, which means the procurement and storage kind of process that these crops have allowed does not operate, is not feasible in everything else. This is partly why attempts to incentivize cultivation of other crops have failed, so I think that's a solution which we need to look for. But again, this has to be combined with the old issues of productivity, of better water utilization, of properly priced inputs, and all of the logistics, transportation, storage, and so on, which we've been talking about for a long time. Now, how does the political economy work? One would imagine that the states that have the strongest vested interest in the existing regime are the ones that produce the most rice and wheat. And when you look at the partnerships that the BJP has entered into, two significant ones are the alleviation in Punjab and the EEP in Andhra Pradesh. Punjab is together the largest supplier of food grains to the public procurement system. Andhra Pradesh is also a very significant supplier of rice. This doesn't lend itself to an easy solution in terms of trying to break away from the existing incentive system. So this is a challenge which I think will have both institutional and very significantly political dimensions, and we've got to be looking at how this balancing act is done. But bottom line is, if food prices are not contained in some significant way very quickly, we're really looking at a persistent inflation scenario into the foreseeable future. We do see that even with growth at relatively low levels, 5% or less, headline inflation is still at 8% or so. That's not an easy combination to deal with. The second issue that I want to highlight is infrastructure. We all know what mess it is in. But I think what's more important is that the experiment we've tried with the public-private partnership model, while it has had some successes, has not been uniformly so. The basic issue here is that both sides of the partnership have, in a sense, not been able to live up to their commitments. On the public side, there's difficulty in managing all of the commitments on approvals and permissions, and endless series of renegotiations in the middle of contracts has created problems. On the private side, relatively small pool of players who have gotten a majority of the bids, being spread thin organizationally and financially, has made it difficult for both implementation and for raising more money. And this is spilling over into the banking system as a significant asset quality problem, which clearly then has to be dealt with as a consequence of this. But without getting the infrastructure process back on track, we really can't be looking at very optimistic assumptions about where growth is going to, how growth is going to pick up. And I think that's a challenge which clearly will have to get priority. How do we go about it? I think there are three things that are needed. One is we probably have to figure out a way of separating projects from companies, from promoters. Basically because projects are important, the promoters not necessarily so. We have to prioritize, we have to look at the importance of projects in terms of their, what I call network externalities, the ones that have the maximum impact on the system's productivity. And we have to find a way of getting more government money into these projects as seed capital, as an initial infusion of finance. And for that, I have recently referred to a proposal that the first UPA government initiated called the National Investment Fund. It didn't take off for a variety of reasons, but it does offer some sort of a model with appropriate governance for bringing more public money back into infrastructure, which I think is important. The third challenge is employment. You all know the numbers very well, but let me just highlight a few. 1 million, we saw some of that in the voting statistics, but 1 million new entrants into the workforce every month, 12 million a year, 55% of the population employed by agriculture, which would well be significant underemployment. Of the ones that are not in agriculture, close to 60% in either self-employed or informal labor contracts. All of this adds up, only 6-7% of the workforce in the organized sector. All of this adds up to a rather difficult employment challenge. Forget about the new entrants, but even dealing with the existing backlog is going to be a big challenge. And here I think we have to be thinking in terms of greater emphasis on manufacturing, basically steering the growth process into sectors that are more labor intensive, not a very easy thing to do in the current technological context, but a challenge that we've sort of avoided dealing with for many years and that we need to be very focused on. These are, as I said, structural problems. These are not problems that have emerged overnight. They are, to a large extent, the consequence of unfinished agendas in the last 2 decades. And I think this is the story of Indian growth. You deal with a set of problems, you get to a high growth phase, you assume that you've solved all your problems and you continue on that phase forever, and then you get the next set of problems and then you spend another 5 years dealing with them. I think that's the way we do it. That's the way we do it. We have to solve these problems to get to our next high trajectory. I hope we will. And this is really what I think the next government needs to focus on economic policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gokul, for a very knowledgeable contribution. And now, ladies and gentlemen, to speak on the next topic, governance, the challenges ahead, may I call upon our next speaker, Mr. Vinod Rai, former Controller and Auditor General of India, on stage.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Lisa, for having me here today. It's lovely to be here. Quite surprised that there's not many people that hear an auditor, let alone see him on a lovely Friday morning. So good that I have a captive audience today, or it was one captive audience. And that will introduce something about the challenges there for governance in India. For a short while, just to understand issues in perspective, let me take you back in history about what the kind of issues that have led to where we are today, to understand better the challenges we face in the years to come. Commencement of the new millennium for India was very exciting, was very important. We had consolidated all the economic reforms in 1991, and the economy was really getting into gear, doing very well. Come 2003, 2004, 2005, we were, like the democracy was able to deliver near up to the doors of double-digit growth. And that was the time when I think the Indian economy over a period of time had been able to become what I would call a tag, which is stuck with us for a long time, a period of time. That is the tag of an Hindu rate of growth, which was 3.5%, 3%, thereabouts. We broke free of that. The external environment, which earlier had been kind of benign, turned adverse from 2006, and that was the time when we went on to about. Actually, the financial benefits, the financial effects went down. My colleague will explain that better. Did not really hit us. It was the economic consequences of the went down, which come to us in terms of orders, in terms of employment, and in all the difficulties that arose with the economy. Actually, that was roughly the time when there was a certain amount of churning within India, within society movements, etc., had taken up. And this was a kind of a spontaneous descent. And this descent was being driven by younger elements in society and our media which today, 27 years. There was a substantial spontaneous outpouring onto the streets of Delhi and other places also. But the issue that arose was the political executive administration did not know the situation that was coming about, because these were largely voluntary outpourings. And this was a citizen which was coming on the street according to the government. This was a citizen who was raising his voice, coming center stage, and wanting to participate in democracy, participate in formulation. And if anything else, this was the emergence of a voice which we want to accept and heard. And that was yet another myth being developed, and that was a myth of the silent majority. Here was this majority no longer wanting to be silent, wanting to be heard, and that was the consequence of the people coming out. When I was movement, people coming on the streets of India Gate, Jantar Mantar, unfortunately, that happened the day in December 2012. Spontaneous candlelights and things like that. And this was also the urban middle class wanting to mobilize itself. This urban middle class, vis-a-vis politicians, elections, etc., were just not very significant. They, in judge of government debates, took pride in the fact that they probably never came out to vote. This was that middle class which was wanting to assert itself and say that, okay, here am I, and you have to contribute to it. And this was that middle class, the burgeoning middle class, which was seeking good governance, seeking accountability in governance, seeking transparency in policy formulation, and saying, I have a voice, you join the voice. And that's been the play of things that has taken place in going further on. Now, what happened? On the political side, on the political executive side, though coalitions have come to stay, and we are having coalitions come forward. Earlier, I just mentioned about that we at the what comes about in the coalition or B coalition or C coalition. But unfortunately, the issues have begun to raise again. There are issues of the kind two kinds. One was regional, the other could be industrial portfolios. If somebody had a railway portfolio, he or she said, my job, others lay off. They would have lost it. Somebody had a telecom portfolio, my job, anybody else, lobbies, finance ministry, anybody else advising them on that, lay off is my job. Somebody had a civil aviation portfolio, that was again his job, and you don't want to defend it. Seriously, didn't want anybody else, even within that coalition government that comes with instance to interfere. On regional issues, we had a rather good regional governments participating in central government also. Let's take the case of the DMK. Sitting in Tamil Nadu, they did not allow the Prime Minister of the country to participate in the government meeting. They had a voice, they raised the voice, and unfortunately, the federal government had peace in their voice. We had a situation where the Trinamool Congress, where the Chief Minister was supposed to have been in the delegation which went to Bangladesh. She did not vote. Prime Minister went, but the Trinamool did not allow the Prime Minister to sign the peace promotion treaty. But there was another instance of the regional interest dominating the federal interest, and federal appeasing that regional interest. Now, this led to some kind of a weak federal structure. The budget formulations also started seeing more and more funds being allocated to the regional states. Infrastructure, as Dr. Gordon just mentioned, did not see the kind of money inflows coming in. And that is the kind of time when PPPs fell for. PPPs of the kind where, unfortunately, that's where transparency and accountability did not come about, unfortunately went to those bidders who did not have the opportunity to operating in a kind of area where they had got large contracts. And not only were they didn't have public domain knowledge, but they were heavily financially over-leveraged. That's why we have created a huge amount of debts outstanding, which are in the corporate debt restructuring portfolio of different banks. And that's where the so-called, this common parlance as it's referred to, the so-called cronies could not deliver. And that's when societal issues came forward in the sense that there was distrust, crony A versus crony B, my crony versus your crony. Or political parties versus political parties distrust, public versus government, and public itself, there was a distrust between modern society, all for the fact that government was in some ways not able to take cognizance of each of these things and hold forth by itself, take a strong decision or take strong action in each of these. Now, if these so-called cronies had delivered, the situation would have been far, far different in terms of infrastructure, lots of other issues. But unfortunately, they could not, and that's why the economy kept falling. Now, transparency in government, transparency in local resource allocations, also huge governance issues. Now, going forward, I think the journey that has come about in society is going to do us a great. It is the emergence of a new paradigm which will ensure a great deal of accountability of government, which will ensure that anybody in power, say 8 days from today, anybody in power feels that he is going to be sitting in a glass house. Every action of his, every decision of his is going to be very closely scrutinized. Largely because of the fact that far large number of people have come to the fore who are now pushing the government to declare all that it wants to do, all that it is doing, and the kind of things that it intends to be doing to come. And I think good governance, which unfortunately had not been premised on factors of probity and ethical governance, is being questioned and is being questioned in a very good measure. Now, when I talk of good governance, well, certainly government is very much involved in it, but good governance in the corporate setup is not something which we can at this point of time neglect either. Corporate governance is as much to play a significant role in the years to come. And I say this because starting from 2009, January 2009, when that email first broke, and that was one word which raised a lot of doubts about corporate India, that word was Satya. When the capability of regulators in India, the structure or the ethical edifice of corporate governance within the country did come under question. The issue was resolved, hopefully has been resolved satisfactorily in the years to come, and has been a lesson for a large number of other corporates also. But the fact remains that it is more dominant today, largely because any economic development which has to be sustainable will have to be incubated or nurtured in government providing very good governance environment. And good governance environment, but encouraging features of that is that the younger generation, people who are going to be driving the country forward, both on the political side, the executive side, and in the corporate side, are, I would say, part of this emerging paradigm where they would rather play the game by the rules of the game than take shortcuts which may provide them short-term benefits, shortcuts which may beat competition for the time being, but shortcuts which may be legal for bordering on legality, but have in the past been quite other than moral. So morality and ethics has to a very large extent come before, and I think we are in for times where governance will be brought to account, where governance will be responsive, and at the least the most important factor that Ranjay put that in his slides, that corruption is all the other word that would be good governance, is 24% in issue in the present election scenario. We've had an election, say, only 3 years back, state election, where a union minister who had to leave his portfolio because of corruption charges on him, goes to the state, takes over the state president, and wins an election in that state. And his party comes to power, which kind of gave us a very distressing feeling that governance is not, corruption is not that much of an issue. But I think times have changed, and the very fact that the younger element, Gen X, as I would like to call it, Gen X is asking the right questions, and they are part of the burgeoning middle class, which have purchasing power, which are very discerning, which are very demanding in a large number of ways. And they have come to the fore. We see them running society in a large number of ways. Now, I think we are going to, irrespective of coalitions that come to power, parties which come to power, I think the situation has come that from this journey that India has gone through in the last 3 to 4, 5 years, good things are emerging, green shoots are being seen, whether it's politics where a certain vice president of the Congress party tears up an ordinance and says, well, I don't think we need legislation. Whichever way it was done, rhetoric or otherwise, but it was a good move that the ordinance which was supposed to be for so-called patent politicians, that ordinance was withdrawn. We've had similar such things in the executive side also. So I think with the kind of background that we've had, civil society has undergone a change. Governments have been forced to look at the kind of situations which have emerged, and we are in for better times in terms of the. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rai, for your valuable insights. Ladies and gentlemen, to continue the discussion on governance, the challenges ahead, may I now invite on stage Dr. Duvari Subbarao, former Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. Dr. Subbarao, please.
First of all, I want to thank ISAS for inviting me to this panel discussion. I have a lot of value to being here. I want to start with giving you a snapshot of India's current macroeconomic situation. Growth has significantly moderated. Year before last year, growth was below 5%. This is the first time in the last 20 years that growth is going to be less than 5% in 2 consecutive years. Contrast that with the growth that India recorded, posted in the pre-crisis years. 2005 to 2008, we posted growth of 9.5% on average. So people look at both this and say that growth moderation is because of external factors, because of the global financial crisis. I think that would be wrong. Wrong because even in the year of the crisis, 2008-9, India posted growth of 6.7%, which is considerably higher than the growth that we are recording today. We had a classic V-shaped recovery. Indeed, we caught up with pre-crisis growth levels. So to attribute growth moderation today to the global financial crisis will be misleading and wrong from a policy perspective. So what's caused this growth moderation? If I were to identify one single factor, I would say that single factor is significant decline in investment. If you look at the pre-crisis years and today, investment, particularly corporate investment as a proportion of GDP, has come down by half. Today, growth of investment is slower than growth of GDP. So there is a significant, substantial decline in investment, and today's investment is tomorrow's production capacity, and that decline in investment has caused this growth deceleration. What about inflation? Retail inflation is stubborn at 8+%. There is concern about core inflation, about how sticky inflation has been. Actually, one of the intriguing things about India's macroeconomic situation today is that even as growth has come down below 5%, inflation remains sticky at 8+%. A lot of people try to explain that, and the most credible explanation for that is probably India's potential growth rate has come down. We did some studies in the Reserve Bank that shows the potential growth rate of India has come down. Finally, the balance of payment situation. The rupee has stabilized. All of you will recall that after the announcement of the taper in May 1st and then in July last year, the rupee reacted quite sharply, depreciated by over 20%, but stabilized thereafter. In fact, it's the only currency to have actually withstood actual taper, not the announcement of taper, but the actual taper. There has been a sharp reduction in the current account deficit as well. Last year, we don't have the final figures yet, but the expectation is that the current account deficit will be about half of what it was the year before. That stabilization is comforting, but I want to say that we should not take too much comfort because a lot of structural adjustment is still necessary on the external front. Having given you a snapshot of the economy, I want to talk about 5 misperceptions that the new government must guard against, and in that process, highlight some of the challenges that the new government must confront. The first misperception is that if we jumpstart investment, growth will turn around quickly and robustly. Jumpstarting investment is necessary, but to believe that if we just jumpstart investment, the economy will get onto an escape velocity and a virtuous cycle of investment, jobs, consumption, low inflation, fiscal correction, etc., will be just getting ahead of ourselves. I think revival growth in a sustainable way, getting back to the high growth trajectory that we saw in the pre-crisis years, is possible, but it's going to be a marathon, it's not going to be a sprint. Why do I say that? Let me tell you a story. Most of you may have read Sherlock Holmes. So Sherlock Holmes and Watson, they were investigating a murder, and they went outside London. They worked the whole day. It was nightfall. They couldn't return to London, so they had a supper in the local pub and went to sleep. They put up a tent and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, Holmes wakes up Watson and says, "Watson, get up, get up." And he says, "Yeah, what's happened?" "No, do you see? What do you see?" So Watson looks up and looks at the sky and says, "Wonderful, you know. I've never seen such a blue, clear sky in London. It's all this falling. I'm so happy to see it. It's exhilarating. What else do you see?" And Watson drops his mind and says, "I see the stars, I see the planets." "What else do you see, Watson?" "I see God's creation in all its bloom. Thank you for bringing me outside London." But then Holmes is getting frustrated. He says, shakes him up and says, don't you see somebody stole our tent? So it's like that. We have to accelerate the economy, but we have to see the reality. There are constraints on how quickly, how robustly growth can be regenerated. Let me explain some of them. The first one is stalled projects. Yes, projects have been stalled for a long time. The outgoing government has done a lot of work to declaw the stalling. But even if the new government picks up on that and puts more vigor into it, translating from parents in Delhi to actual accelerating project implementation at the ground level is going to take some time. There is some gestation period in remobilization. Also note that contrary to popular perception, much of the delay, much of the stalling in projects is happening at state level. 80% of the responsibility for project stalling is at the state level. What many people don't understand is that chief ministers in India are enormously more resourceful, enormously better positioned to move the economy faster than the prime minister. That's why I think that it will help if in the new government, there are some leaders who have practical exposure to state level administration and state level issues. The other reason growth may not pick up is something that we know referred to as corporate leverage. In the pre-crisis years, even after the crisis, a lot of corporates borrowed, invested aggressively. Those projects have stalled, their viability has been affected. They are unable today to raise equity or debt, and they will continue to be unable to raise equity or debt rapidly. What about the supply side of debt? Will banks be able to lend? That's also doubtful because of the non-performing assets, NPAs of banks going up. The fourth, perhaps not as recognized a factor for growth not picking up, investment not picking up, will be that if you try to stimulate investment too rapidly, that stimulate demand, but investment translating into production will take 2, 3, 4 years. Meanwhile, if you stimulate demand, that will exert inflationary pressures. So if you want to generate growth in a non-inflationary way, growth has to be going up only slowly. People might think I'm being too cynical. No, I'm not being cynical. I'm only saying that we have to be realistic. The new government has to manage expectations about how quickly or robustly growth can be regenerated. I think one of the first things that the new Prime Minister has to do is to call all the chief ministers and say we're putting our political differences behind. We fought a very acrimonious election, but that's all behind us now, and let's get moving with restarting the economy. The second misperception that the new government must guard against is to believe that the Reserve Bank's tight monetary policy and high interest rates are the ones spurring investment. People are never tired of reminding me that the governor of the Reserve Bank raised interest rates 13 times. I thought I was doing a bad cop and leaving a window for Governor Rajan to unwind some of the tightening. Unfortunately, that window is not open yet. I hope Governor Rajan does not break my record, not so much because I want to protect my legacy, dubious as it is, but for the sake of the country, that we'll be able to soften interest rates. But those who argue that the Reserve Bank must soften interest rates make two arguments. The first argument is that our inflation today is a problem of supply. In order to resolve those supply constraints, investment has to take place. In order for investment to take place, interest rates have to be low. The Reserve Bank is fighting the wrong battle. It must lay off and allow interest rates to come down. The second argument we will make against the Reserve Bank's policy is that much of our inflation today, as Subir had referred to, is coming from food inflation. People also say that raising interest rates to fight food inflation is inappropriate policy. Now, I think the new government must resist the temptation to push these arguments and to prevail on the Reserve Bank to soften its anti-inflation stance. Let me respond to those two arguments briefly. To people who say that high interest rates are hurting growth, hurting investment, I want to say that this tension that people see between growth and inflation is a false tension. There is no trade-off between growth and inflation. At any rate, there is no trade-off between growth and inflation when inflation is as high as 8+%. Bringing down inflation is necessary for sustaining growth because it's only in a situation of low and steady inflation that investors and consumers can make informed decisions. To those who say that interest rates today are high, let me also say this. Interest rates in India today, real interest rates, are lower than they were in the pre-crisis years, or at any rate comparable to the pre-crisis years. I need to take another 10 minutes, please. Thank you. He's putting up a board saying 2 minutes. So those who say that interest rates are high, I want to say this. Interest rates today, real interest rates, are lower than the pre-crisis years. In the pre-crisis years, investment zoomed. Why is investment stalled today? Not because of interest rates, there's something else underway. Now let me respond to the argument about food inflation. Like Subi said, no matter what the driver of inflation, if inflation persists for long enough, inflation expectations get entrenched and inflation gets generalized. Therefore, monetary policy, raising interest rates by the Reserve Bank, has to be the first line of defense, no matter what the driver of inflation. So, the sum and substance of this is that the new government must resist the temptation to pressure the RBI to soften its inflation stance. The third misperception is to believe that the balance of payments concerns are behind us. Yes, the rupee has stabilized. Yes, the Reserve Bank has buffered the foreign exchange reserves. Yes, the rupee has been possibly the only emerging economy currency that has withstood the table. But on that account, to believe that we have made a robust balance of payments adjustment will be misleading. Consider the current account deficit. As I said earlier, current account deficit last year would have been half the year before. But is that sustainable? Much of the decline in current account deficit has come because of decline in gold imports. And decline in gold imports has come because of sharp increase in customs duty and some draconian quantitative restrictions. Those have provided relief in the short term. But you cannot continue these measures in the long term. They're already proven to be porous. So if these measures continue, gold will come into illegal channel and will continue to lose capital. Will the demand for gold come down? Probably not, because the demand for gold, over the base demand for gold, that's coming because of a hedge against inflation. People are buying gold, investing in gold because they have no other comparable asset, financial asset in the country that gives them that return. So as long as inflation is high, gold demand is going to persist. There is also concern on capital account. Yes, over the last 7-8 months, the Reserve Bank has brought in a lot of money. That is high cost money. And at some point of time, that money is got to go away. You've got to service that debt, return that debt. And as the taper continues, will India be able to continue to finance? Will India be able to finance its what is going to be a higher current account deficit in the years ahead? So what I want to say is that the new government must realize that there has been stabilization, but no adjustment on the external front. The fourth misperception, which is a quintessentially political economy issue, is that the new government must shed the notion that fiscal consolidation is on track. All we need to do is more of the same. I must say that one of the most credible accomplishments of the outgoing government, particularly of Finance Minister Chidambaram, has been the fiscal consolidation that's brought about. But any endorsement of that fiscal consolidation effort has to be very qualified. I would not give it 3 cheers, I would just give it 1 cheer. Why am I withholding 2 cheers? It's because even as there has been an adjustment at the quantitative level, the quality of adjustment has been very poor. So the new finance minister, whoever he or she might be, has to do the unenviable, painful task of fiscal consolidation. I was finance secretary at the state level, I was finance secretary at the federal level. I understand the extreme political difficulty in making fiscal consolidation. What you must note is that the discretionary expenditure in India is quite low. The non-discretionary expenditure is quite high. In the short term, you can't cut salaries, you can't cut pensions, you can't cut interest, you cannot cut defense expenditure, and you do not want to cut subsidies. So where does the axe fall? The axe falls on capital expenditure. But that's exactly the wrong thing to do. So I believe the new government, particularly the new finance minister, must focus on quality of fiscal consolidation, must do away with doctoring numbers, must shun the temptation, strong as it is, to doctor the numbers, and must actually not just have an agreement on the headline number, but on the entire roadmap for fiscal consolidation, which is to say that they must say this fiscal deficit must come down from this level to this level, and this is how we're going to achieve it. Only then will that roadmap be credible. Finally, the new government must shun this belief that the India growth story is inevitable. Let me give you a bit of a background. We, for a long time, for 40, 50, 60 years, India believed that we were locked into the Hindu rate of growth, that we can never grow beyond 3.5%. And then the near miracle happened in the years between 2003 to 2008, when we clocked growth of 9+%. That raised aspirations, raised hopes, boosted confidence. But there is a chance, in fact, we already see that that confidence is becoming overconfidence and is becoming hubris. I, for one, believe that the India growth story is credible. The long-term growth drivers, the capacity levels in the country, the gap and go entrepreneurs, demographic profile, all of these are plus factors, those are intact. But just because we have the growth drivers, it is not inevitable that the India growth story will materialize. The India growth story will materialize only if the new government does the right things, does all the right things, does them rightly, and does them in good time. So the biggest challenge and opportunity for the new government is going to make the India growth story happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Subbarao, for sharing your thoughts with us. Ladies and gentlemen, let us now pause for a very deserved coffee break. The session will reconvene in 15 minutes, so please kindly be seated by 4 p.m. Thank you.